Good afternoon, everyone. This is Craig Gerlach, Superintendent of Schools, and I am going to take my mask off. The governor's order, as it relates to the statewide mandate, allows for us to take our mask off when we're speaking on educational issues, which this certainly meets that standard as well, the teaching in general. I don't want to assume anything. I'm going to start around the corner here and have introductions. I'm going to start with you, Brian.
Brian Casey, Director of Technology.
Connie Migara, Director of Secondary Education.
Liz Potter-Nelson, Secondary Curriculum and Instruction Coordinator.
Thanks for giving up some time on this very beautiful day. Brian is going to review the questions. We have a number of questions that were sent prior to, and then Brian will be monitoring the chat. Sarah O'Donnell's also online, and she'll be monitoring and taking notes as well. In the event that we don't get to all your questions, we will do so after and get those notes out or answers to those questions. First, let me start where we started as a cabinet in March. Wow, the shoe fell in March. I don't think there was any of us that, and then we canceled school. We actually canceled school right prior to the state closing. That was an unbelievably stressful decision that was made that we obviously didn't foresee, much less knowing that 6 months later, we're going to be in this position today, trying to reopen our schools and meet the needs of our students as well as you as staff. The first thing we did as we prepared to move forward was to create commitments to focus on and to lean on as we built our plans. And the first was safety. Students and staff safety is a top priority. Plans will reflect guidance from the CDC, state, and Portage County health departments. And we are doing that. Right now, we have support from the state, the CDC, as well as Portage County. Governor Evers supports local control in terms of reopening schools, knowing that what's happening in Portage County is very different than what's happening in Dane County or Milwaukee County. We have the support of the Portage County Health Department, specifically Ray Shabilsky, who is the Director of Human Services, and Gary Garsky, who is our local health officer for Portage County. And at this particular point in time, they support our plans, they like our plans, and they are supporting us as we move forward. Obviously, if that changes, then our direction changes. The other commitment was flexibility. Plans will be developed to allow for a fluid response, keeping in mind student and parent capacity, coupled with financial resources of the district. And that's what our plan does. We know that you as a staff have a limited capacity. Let me rephrase that. You have a very high capacity, but we all have limitations in terms of what we can do as it relates to something as difficult as moving forward, educating kids with COVID-19 hanging over us, as well as parents. Parents have a limited capacity as it relates to working with their children, whether it's their children face-to-face or whether it's their children e-learning, and of course their own lives, which mostly or most of them includes their own work schedules, and of course coupled with financial resources. I know that this year is going to cost us financially. We have a deficit in our budget. We have a very strong fund balance, and I have been telling the board that if there's ever been a time where we need to consider potentially dipping into our fund balance for one-time expenditures, and hopefully whatever we do this year would be a one-time expenditure, because we're hoping that next year doesn't look like this year. But truly, if we've ever had a crisis in public education, we're looking at it right now. And the third commitment is instruction. Plans will reflect a preference for traditional classroom learning and focus on creating conditions to safely reopen schools. Instructional models will include blended e-learning options for 7-12 and pre-K-12 in the event that traditional classroom learning cannot occur. So we are going to talk this afternoon about instruction specifically as it relates to 7-12. Quickly, and I'm sure you're aware, our elementary schools The plan is to open 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Friday, with Wednesday planning time and deep cleaning of the building. And yours, as it relates to a blended, will be talked about in depth, and that's what we're going to focus on. Knowing that all students have the opportunity for signing up for our virtual learning programs. At this particular point in time, we have about 10% of our students or our parents selecting for their students that are requesting e-learning. We also know that we have approximately 20 staff members that have indicated that they cannot return because of health conditions. We are analyzing those one at a time or individually and making decisions what's going to work out for both the school district as well as the employee. That said, I'm going to turn this over to Connie.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think Brian's going to share a slide deck that we're going to be working through. We are going to have some talking points, knowing that we need to make sure we provide time for the questions and answers that you have for today. For today's goals, we're hoping that all of our participants will understand the instructional models that were put forth to the board and what conditions are necessary for each of those models. We also want to touch upon how teaching and learning will look different this fall in a blended or full e-learning environment. And then finally, we're going to talk about some professional development and supports that we are going to put in place to help all of our teachers on board and back into the classroom, and then certainly to help with curriculum and instruction. So under the responsible reopening, next one. Next one.
Okay.
So when we were looking at the commitments and what is important for safety, we knew and we're quite aware that our traditional instructional model was not going to allow for the conditions to be safe in terms of social distancing. So the first thing we did is looked at a blended model, and a blended model, simply put, is cutting all of our school populations in half. We had to first look at what that might look like in terms of how to divide the students. And the first we looked at was by alphabet, trying to keep families together, knowing that childcare could be an issue on Wednesdays when elementary children are not there, and that siblings could help fill that void. Childcare is an issue in our community for parents to go back to work and for kids to be safe. Fortunately, as we looked at dividing those populations in half, it was very, very important to us that we needed to have demographics that were similar in each of those cohorts. And we talk about cohort, it's simply the group of students with last names from A to L, and the cohort B, the last name from M to Z. And fortunately, when we looked at the demographics, they were very similar in terms of diversity. And we certainly didn't want one cohort to be imbalanced in terms of what our overall demographics look like for the district. So that is how we chose to make our cohorts. For our instructional model in a 7-12 schedule, you're aware students will be coming cohort A on Monday and Tuesday, the other Thursday and Friday. And we purposely made Wednesday as a professional development collaboration time for teacher teams, course team, grade level teams to work together to provide this kind of blended instruction, knowing and hearing from staff that time is necessary to do this right. One of the other models would be then a full-time e-learning, and that is certainly what we did last spring. Going back to our commitments, our goal, while we would want to see students 5 days a week, we can't do that safely at our secondary buildings. So that blended model right now meets the needs of seeing our kids. While not 5 days a week, we will have some face-to-face instruction, which we know is critical for student success. The other option is a flexible e-learning, and that really, we have some students for health reasons, for other reasons, parents do not feel comfortable sending their kids back to school, but do not want to leave our district, nor do we want them to leave our district to attend a virtual school elsewhere. So we are providing that opportunity for some students who would continue to have their BEN or their PJ or their SPASH schedule. They want to stay a part of that classroom. They want to keep those classes, but starting in the fall, for whatever reason, cannot attend those face-to-face sessions. That's what we are calling flexible e-learning. And that means those students may opt back into the classroom at quarter if conditions change. And the reason that works well is that they will not have missed the instruction for that first quarter. They won't have attended face-to-face, but they still will be involved in that class in a virtual manner. And then finally, we do have options for families who know that they are not going to come back to school this year. And they have identified themselves and they're looking for options. And again, we don't want to lose those families. We don't want to lose those students. So those students can be a part of our online learning center, which you are probably aware was designed for students to take an additional class, to take an online learning class if there was a schedule conflict, to take an online learning class from us for credit recovery purposes. We had students that were homebound that did online learning. So we've expanded our online learning center to provide instruction on a full-time basis for kids that know that they're not going to come back at all this year. And that would be the expansion of our online learning center. And just as an aside, we have recently, 2 years ago, we became a portion of the Rural Virtual Academy, RVA, which you've probably seen advertisements about that. The reason we did that is we already had many kids that were enrolled in the Rural Virtual Academy but lived in Stevens Point. They invited us in to be a part of their consortium. The reason we did that is that they have a very well-designed, well-respected, and very successful full-time virtual school. But being a part of that consortium allows those kids, should we go back to a traditional environment, to participate in some of our programming within our schools.
So knowing that we're headed back in a blended model, the question has come up is, what is blended learning? And blended learning is an educational model that combines traditional classroom experiences with e-learning experiences. And so we're asking teachers to really stop and think about the curriculum that they have and what are those experiences that have to happen face-to-face, things like labs, discussions, maybe hands-on experiences, and then also think about what experiences could happen during e-learning. And so when we start to think about what this looks like, we're asking teachers to kind of think about the building blocks of identifying first what their key learning targets are, and then what the building blocks are that students can show that they have learned or achieved that learning target. And so we're really, when we start to think about this, we start to kind of think about it in a modular approach where we now have 2 days that you will be face-to-face and you can design experiences for students to take place in face-to-face, and then about 2 to 3 experiences that are going to be virtual. And those are experiences, things like readings or interactive videos, formative learning checks, things that students could do at home through some of our various technology tools that we have available to students.
This next slide, I did cover very generally a few moments ago. This is provided for you. We wanted to put down, these are full-time virtual opportunities within our school district for parents who know that their students are not going to come back this year. Those would be students that we would recommend into the online learning center, Rural Virtual Academy. The spots are closed and they were, quite frankly, last May. So this gives you kind of an idea of who would be the targeted students for that, what kind of curriculum is used, what platform is used. So it's just some more detailed information on what I was talking about previously. If a student knows that they're not going to come back for the start of the 2021 school year, we are going to recommend the online learning center as an option. The blended and flexible blended would be those students who just might not be comfortable starting this fall, but really intend at some point to come back into the classroom. One of the other options I wanted to mention before Liz jumps into Schoology guidelines, that is for professional development. We purposely and strategically changed the start of the school year, knowing that in August, when teachers come back, that time needs to be in working with building principals on what are our new protocols for operations. How are we going to do things differently so that we can maintain safety? What do my classes look like? How many students do I have? I've already heard from a teacher who, theoretically, when you cut your population in half, you would take your U.S. history class of 25 students and, in a perfect world, it would be 12. We all know that's not going to happen, but it's the best we could do. There are going to be some classes where they might have to move into a classroom. For example, if there's 17 students and the classroom's too small, we're going to have to make those kinds of adjustments.
When we went to the extended e-learning last spring, we got a lot of feedback when that finished about different things that we could tweak to make things better moving forward. So specifically, we have a couple guidelines that were shared earlier this summer and shared recently about things that we're going to expect in Schoology. The first is that we're going to ask that there's clear course organization. We know that each content area has a different way to display their course materials, but we really want to make sure that we are clearly putting materials into our courses and thinking of our courses in Schoology as a virtual classroom. And so it may make sense to organize by unit or by chapter of the book or by the type of the material. And that is a decision that you and your content team or you and your team, your department will decide which makes most sense for you moving forward. But we are going to ask that there is clear course organization. We're also going to ask that you clearly communicate that course organization and your contact information to parents and to students within that course. And then we're also going to make sure and ask that both assignments and document names match across all of our platforms. So the document that you are uploading for students to use matches what that assignment is called in Schoology and then matches what is in Skyward. We have a document that we will be sharing later this week and that the TIS will be using next week during Tech Week that will help in some of the logistics in accomplishing all three of these Schoology requirements. When we think about professional development too, we'll have some very specific guidelines for when, how we want the professional development we give before students return, specifically during that first week in September. So September 1st through 4th, we are going to really focus on making sure that you have time to develop curriculum and lessons that really help your students and make sure that everybody on your team is working collaboratively together. So we'll provide a framework, but really that time will be yours to work with your content teams, with the people in your department to develop lessons and activities that support your students. And then we really want to honor and respect that Wednesday and make sure that in the morning you have designated collaboration time with your content teams, with your departments to make sure those lessons and experiences are hands-on and ready to go for the rest of that week moving forward.
One second, please.
One of the things that I was going to mention with Liz's discussion on Schoology was that we heard very loud and clear from our students and from our families that the organization of content consistently is absolutely critical. In fact, it's absolutely necessary as a part of our UDL commitment. Kids found barriers to learning because they couldn't find things and gave up. One class looked vastly different from another class. So one of the emphasis and kind of the expectations is for us to organize Schoology so that access to materials online is not a barrier to learning. And so that's a really important part of the work. And again, as I mentioned, we purposely gave an additional week before students return so that you have time to prepare. So at this time, I think Brian is going to monitor some questions that you might want to post, and we will do our best to answer, knowing that there's still things that change on a daily basis and still things that we are working on. So have patience with us if we don't have an answer, but we will do our best to find an answer for you if we don't have it today.
Yeah, you can submit questions on the Q&A portion if you're logged in right now. We'll get those questions and we'll attempt to address all of the questions if we can. And if we can't, we'll find a way to get back to you. We're going to start, also I will mention I'm going to take them as they come in, to be fair, and balance those with questions that were submitted live versus pre-submitted questions. First question, we were instructed to have e-learning content take no more than 20 minutes in the spring. Is there a recommendation for the fall?
That's a great question. And one of the reasons that we put that time kind of framework for teachers, knowing that this was absolutely new for all of us. And all of you chose and were trained to teach face-to-face and to pivot in a day's notice to be an online teacher was really, really hard. And so we made that kind of time framework to assure that our lessons were going to look different, so students weren't overwhelmed and would stay engaged with us. Our data show that at our secondary buildings, with the exception of CFC, we're about 85% engagement. Liz was measuring student login to Schoology daily. And so that kind of engagement data is excellent. But at the same time, what about those 15% that weren't engaging? So that was the recommendation. Back to the question, we are not going to put that kind of a time frame. We know, and we heard back from teachers that was really, really difficult for you. And you needed a bit more time, but we still have to be realistic to know that in a blended environment, what you traditionally were able to work through and present to students is going to have some things are going to have to be taken up. We simply are going to have to work together on what those essential learning targets are, those learner outcomes, because you're just not going to have access to your students as much as you did in the past. So no, we're not going to put a 20-minute time limit on, but at the same time, we have to be really mindful of how we can keep students engaged and not overwhelmed.
Yeah, clarifying question to what you were saying. The teacher is asking if they understood correctly. Students will be gone for the year. Will they be working with us as classroom teachers, or will they be doing something different?
In a flexible e-learning environment, if families are choosing that, and again, that's when I'm a student, I'm at Ben Franklin, I still want my 6 classes and I want those 6 teachers, but I can't come back in the fall. They will be in your class. They just won't come on those 2 days of face-to-face instruction. They will access your materials online just like all the other kids are doing those other days, but for whatever reason, they can't. That would be still a student in your class, would be in your grade book, would be on your class roster. Students who know that they are going to be gone for the entire year, we will be recommending that online learning center. Again, we're not forcing our families to do anything, but that would be a recommendation, because if I'm going to be online all year long, I ought to take advantage of the teachers that are in the online learning center, because that's what they were trained to do, is to be online learning teachers. So that's what we're going to be recommending. But again, we're not forcing any family into one model.
Another question, do our lessons need to be the same for both cohorts, whether they are in the classroom or at home? For example, if it is Monday, do I have an in-person lesson for cohort A and an e-version of that same lesson for cohort B?
So I'm going to go ahead and answer that one. When we're thinking about it, I think it really helps. Oh, sorry. I'll take my mask off. I think it will really help to kind of shift how we think. We are trained to think of teaching on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I think it really helps if we start to shift our mentality to what is our learning target, and then what activities can students participate in to achieve that learning target. And so really, like I said, really thinking about those virtual experiences that students can have and those face-to-face experiences that students can have. So it's not developing necessarily Monday, my virtual students will do this and my e-learning students, I'm modifying it that way, but it's really thinking, I have a reading that students could do at home that will address this. I'm going to do a lab that addresses this. I'm going to have this formative assessment that students are going to do, and they're going to work on this project. So really, it is a shift, and it's sometimes something that I stumble over doing, but it really is a shift in how we think about providing instruction to students in trying to kind of wrestle through and work through what that blended model looks like.
Okay. On Wednesdays, are teachers able to meet virtually and work from home?
At this point, we want to be sensitive, as our employers throughout the districts are being very sensitive to Wednesdays with childcare needs. So at this time, we're asking teachers to be in the building to collaborate. If there are childcare needs, we are going to be sensitive to that. So some of our teachers might be at home, but the expectation will be still to participate and collaborate with colleagues. And quite frankly, in order to do what Liz described, our teacher teams whether you're a biology team, US history team, 8th grade science team, to do this is going to involve sharing tasks and looking at each other's area of expertise, so that you put this virtual classroom out there and each person it might change, but has some elements that they're responsible for. Teachers, all of you worked so hard this spring, and to make this go well and to keep your sanity, I think you need to rely on one another. So the Wednesday, in answer to your question, we are going to be sensitive as a district to childcare needs, but you're also going to have that expectation that collaboration does take place with colleagues on Wednesdays.
I have a question about student collaboration at school. In a communication, we were asked to not have students work with each other. However, I was wondering if plexiglass or another barrier was in place, would that allow for students to be able to work together?
If we have, at this point, when you go back to the commitments, we have to make sure that students are safe, but that we also have the capacity to maintain. So we could not get plexiglass in every single classroom. That's not to say that there might not be some areas where that is determined down the road to use plexiglass so that we can have student collaboration. But at this point, we do not have those structures in every classroom.
But students could collaborate as long as they maintain the 6 feet of social distance.
They can, and we also have our students masked. So the 2 guidelines that we've been working with Portage County, we meet every single Tuesday. The two big areas that they said we need to focus on is that put structures in place so that students can distance, knowing that at the secondary level kids are passing. But with masks, our Portage County health officials said having students mask and passing between 5 minutes is something that he would accept and support.
I think when we think about collaboration, we can also start to leverage some of our technology tools. So students could be in a classroom, but they could be using the Google suite of products, or they could be using discussions in Schoology, and they could be collaboratively working while still apart from each other.
We had a question about specific plexiglass deployments. I guess, do we have any information about specific areas? If teachers have a question, if there's plexiglass in their area or another area they would have questions about, who do they ask?
That would be building principals.
Okay. I have another question here, is pre-submitted. What will be the protocol if a person tests positive, and how will sick days work if we have to quarantine?
Well, if a person tests positive, we anticipate that we may have a building or a wing of a building in an elementary school that may need to quarantine or to shut down. Possibly an entire building might need to shut down. We work with Portage County Health and Human Services to make those decisions. And then with the sick days, if they're quarantined, is a really good question that I don't have the exact answer to at this time.
We have a question about grading, online grading versus blended. What are the online expectations, materials, lessons, etc., compared to in-person? And also understanding that there hasn't been additional time allocated to teachers for grading. There's quite a few parts to that.
So I can jump in. So I think when we think about grading specifically with blended and juggling with our students who are in a flexible e-learning model, I think that really falls onto each of your departments. And I think we are going to provide time at the beginning during that week in September to start having conversations with you and your department, you and your colleagues, about what you are going to do for grading practices, how you want to look at certain assignments, common rubrics, things like that that you think are very key and crucial within your content area. I know, and I think Connie can speak more to this, I know that on the Online Learning Center, there are already established grading criteria for those in particular. And then Wednesday afternoons, we'll ask for collaboration time in the morning, but there will be time on Wednesday afternoon to do some of that grading and assessing.
And as a teacher, when you're back in a blended environment, your schedule is still going to give you that prep time, because your schedule will look just like it would as if all students were back. You're just going to see half the kids on Monday and Tuesday and the other half on Thursday and Friday. I do want to share, though, that we have made a commitment to go back to our traditional grading system. And our online learning center uses the traditional grading system. But as Liz mentioned, we're going to have to kind of rethink what does grading look like when we see kids for much less time.
We have a question about the role of EAs. Will EAs have extra duties related to COVID? And what do EAs do on Wednesdays when all students are online for the day? Will special ed EAs still be required to find their own subs if they're sick?
Our educational, right now, our building principals are working on plans for our educational assistant. Based on the needs of the building, some educational assistants, if they work 35 hours a week, we're going to give options for them to work those 35 hours in 4 days because the needs of the kids require. And some EAs then will be working on Wednesdays, clerical, but again, we're trying to be flexible and to use our EAs for student assistance as much as possible. I can't answer that sub question on the educational assistant. I don't have an answer at that time, but I do know that building principals are looking at plans on how to best use their EA time. And for some EAs to be working a 4-day week while not losing any hours, but working 4-day week for longer periods of time to help with student supervision and those kinds of things that we know we're gonna have to address as kids come into school, as kids leave school, and kids during lunch. They're going to want to congregate, and we're going to have to have additional assistance to make sure that they're moving.
Been a lot of questions about the safety measures. For example, lunch. Can you discuss how social distancing is going to be enforced or practiced during lunch hours?
Our principals are working on plans on where they're going to be probably opening up additional areas for students to eat lunch. That's one of the areas that's going to be needing to great detail and attention, as that's the one time that students will not be masked when they're eating. So that's a great question. Principals are working on that. But students are going to be masked the rest of the time in the building, which in and of itself is a huge task. But again, to bring kids back, that is necessary.
Who's responsible for cleaning desks, books, whiteboard markers, etc. after each class period?
We are working on plans for that. We have ordered, if you can imagine, huge tubs of hand sanitizers, gloves, and disinfectant wipes for every single classroom in every single secondary building, as well as in the library office spaces. So we do have a huge order of sanitizing equipment. And then the plans for that, we're going to have fewer kids in the classroom on whether kids are going to disinfect. We're working on those plans.
Are there funds available to order personal protective equipment for lab-based classrooms?
Yes, Brigida right now, Altman Austin is working with the career technical education instructional leaders, specifically on plans for classes like welding and other tech ed classes.
Okay. Can we discuss safety in band and orchestra, a unique situation? What guidelines do we have for social distancing and PPE? And also guidelines for when school will be moved between styles of learning.
So we're meeting with Dave Poffenbarger, our secondary principals. Music is such a unique area, and we're going to just have to be creative. We don't have all the answers for music right now. What we did do is in the spring, our music staff members requested a smart music software that we were able to purchase for them that is useful for online instruction for music classes. But the specifics of that, we are still working on.
The last part of that question was that
for band and orchestra, what are we doing for those situations? Number one, the protective social distancing measures, and then in the instance that we move from a blended to back to regular instruction.
yes, I'm in regular contact with Portage County Health Department, specifically Gary Karski, as it relates to monitoring benchmarks, if I may. The county is looking to the state to provide some benchmarks in terms of helping us make these decisions. The county has yet to get that information. Quite frankly, I'm not sure if they will. We have the support of Governor Evers. At this point, we have the support of the state. We have the support of the county. If that changes, as I said earlier, we'll make adjustments. That's a really difficult question. Everybody wants a number, and it's difficult just to look at numbers. Yet that's an indicator. Obviously, if our numbers skyrocket, that tells us something. But where's that magic number to determine whether or not we shut down a school, let alone the school district? Much of it is to the extent that we can sustain what we're doing. I'm as concerned about bus drivers as anything. We have maximized all of our substitute bus drivers because we're increasing bus routes, and we have very few substitute bus drivers. So if we have a problem with COVID and bus drivers, we may be forced to shut our transportation department down. Food service, same thing. If we have issues with food service, we can move some staff from one building to another, and we can close down a kitchen if we have to, and we can satellite preparations. We do that right now. We have production kitchens, for example. So there's so many indicators that we have to look at in terms of whether or not we can sustain our plan. And then, of course, substitute teachers within a building. The question came up this morning. I had a meeting with the various health organizations in Portage County regarding substitute teachers. That's a concern. We may have plenty of subs, and the Rapids district might have a significant outbreak. We share substitutes. So it's not just about what the numbers look like and how many of our staff could be infected. It's very, very complicated. And I know people don't want to hear this, but I think it's one of those issues. We're going to know it. We're just going to know it at that particular point in time. And that's just not a very scientific method of determining this. But this is new for all of us. You know, that the common phrase, we're building this plane as we fly it. There are challenges that are in front of us. We are attempting to meet every one of those challenges. The easy decision, for me right now is to say, let's all go e-learning. That's an easy decision for me, but it's going to be extremely challenging as it relates to students, parents, and staff, in my opinion. So this isn't about taking the easy way out. I am going to move forward and climb this mountain and do everything I can to make it work and assist and offer resources until somebody says, Gerlach, you just can't do it. We recommend you close, or we cannot recommend you staying open right now. And of course, that message is going to come from the state of Wisconsin or Portage County. Until then, we're going to work diligently to find solutions and find reasons why we can do this, rather than focusing on reasons why we can't, because there's a lot of reasons out there that are struggling, that we're struggling with in terms of how to move forward. But I believe that the best thing for the majority of our students is to be in front of a classroom, or be in a classroom in front of teachers and staff in a safe environment. Kind of rambled on that one, but
well, maybe you can help explain. We're getting some questions here too about why the district is not performing temperature checks upon the students.
There's a number of issues out there as it relates to Rashel, for example, indicated this morning they're also concerned about that. All of our bodies run at a little different temperature, and I might be running a high temperature because my body runs as a high temperature. There are issues as it relates to who's going to perform that, because it's considered a medical procedure. Now, obviously, we take temperatures of kids all the time when they're sick, and we call home and say, you know, your son or daughter's got a temperature. This is very different because we've got people on both sides, the left and the right, are ready and willing to take anything on. And many of our decisions that we're making, quite frankly, they're going to end up in the court system. And we've got to be prepared for that. Our legal counsel, quite frankly, is guiding us not to, because there's going to be legal challenges as it relates to temperatures. First, we're not qualified. You know, we have limited health staff. I'm not qualified to take anyone's temperature. And then if I, Craig Gerlach, have a temperature and I get sent home, how long am I going to get sent home for? 14 days. I come back, I still have a high temperature because my body runs at a higher temperature than somebody else's body. So it gets extremely complicated as it relates to taking temperatures. Also, the science out there, and trust me when I say I'm constantly citing and referring to the science. Although the science is going to be a little bit different depending on what media channel you choose to look at. That's the truth of the matter. Are scientists driving this, or politicians driving this? I mean, there's so many things with this. But we aren't, at this particular point, going to take temperatures for those reasons.
I have a couple of questions about masks, too. We know that we're all wearing masks. Two questions came through. Number one, what do we do if a student doesn't have a mask? Will we provide a mask? And number two, what do we do if they refuse to wear a mask?
We have two masks given to us by the DPI. Every school district in the state were given masks for staff and students. You know, masks are going to continue. They're an issue now. It'll continue to be an issue. We are ordering masks. We are stockpiling masks. We're trying to find out what masks work better than others. At the end of the day, as a school district, we have the authority to require masks for both staff and students, unless there's an underlying health condition. And if there's an underlying health condition, there will be an exception made, certainly with medical documentation. Which is interesting all in itself, that there could be teachers and staff that aren't wearing masks. It is what it is. If a student doesn't wear a mask because of a health reason, obviously I just talked about that. If a student is just refusing, we have the authority to say you have to. And if at that particular point in time, they'll have two decisions to make: leave the building, come back with a mask, or leave the building and you will be now on an e-learning program until you're willing to wear the mask. It's as simple as that. We know we're going to have, for those of you that are up at SPAS specifically, we've got some kids that just, they don't like to come to school, and half the time they might not come to school. Those kids are going to come to school because they're going to have some fun with this. And we know that we're going to have some kids that are going to come in and say, hey, my dad says I don't have to wear a mask because this is a bunch of bullshit. Yeah, we're going to have to deal with that. And that kid's going to be out of the building. I'm hoping that over a very short period of time, people get the message, and we're going to work through that. Now, if you don't have a mask, we're going to have masks on the buses. We're going to require staff and students to provide their own masks. We do have masks that we're going to provide, but you know what? We all have these laying all over the place. They get dirty, they get lost, they get stepped on, and we're constantly going to have to continue to get masks. That said, we'll have masks in all of our buses, because if a student comes without a mask, and of course it could be the student that says, well, the hell with it, I'm not wearing a mask. That's one thing. But we're going to have kids that forget them. And we don't want them to have to run back in the house. So get on the bus, here's a mask. We'll do the same thing in every one of our schools. All of our front offices will have masks for those kids that forget them from time to time. But we will expect people to provide their own. We have provided one, the blue one that I'm wearing, that you would have received. We'll also have two more coming again from the DPI. We're constantly looking at ordering what we can order with getting some some branding on them for per building and whatnot. So as a district, we will continue to provide them periodically. But that is the scenario with masks.
And some food-related questions. Obviously, that's a big concern, food insecurity during the current crisis. Number one, will SPASH students be able to leave for lunch? And what are we doing for students that are at home on Wednesdays and e-learning days to provide them with food service?
Great question. The SPASH closed campus, quite frankly. That's why we're having these meetings. That's one of the issues I can't believe we didn't talk about, because it's a big one and it's odd. It didn't come across our desk yet. We're going to talk about, I saw that Toma High School just closed campus.
So is
Just
that
yesterday.
up for discussion in our district?
We will put that on cabinet tomorrow morning. We haven't, yes, we will put that up for discussion. I've been an advocate of closing campus at SPASH since I've been here, but we couldn't because of the size of the cafeteria and commons. Well, now that's changed. We know that there's a lot of no good that happens when kids leave for lunch. I'm sorry.
How do we feed kids that aren't?
Yes, the state right now, or the federal government, approved 3 waivers as it relates to our federal food program. We're waiting on the state to act on those. I can't believe they won't. It'll allow us the 3 waivers. One is timing of lunch. Right now, we have certain times we have to serve lunch between. Every school does. That if that gets waived, we can have longer and more lunch hours, and of course that'll be needed. The other, it'll allow parents to actually come in if their child is on e-learning that day. They can actually come to school and they can pick up. The kids can't, but the parents can. And then the third waiver will allow us to do what we've been doing, is providing through our own transportation system. Because we know that there are kids out there that their only meal is, or their only good meal, if I may, or only meal is coming from school. So we likely will be able to meet all of those, all of the issues that relate to students and lunch. It will tax our food service, and kudos to our food service and our transportation departments. They've been doing this since March. They've been working their tails off. And they really have done a nice job. They served over 500,000 meals over the course of the
Related to
summer.
that, we have a question from an EA wondering if we would rotate EAs into the food service program again in the upcoming year.
We rotated aides because we had aides that had time to do that, and our food service was taxed. And so that worked out well. I don't know the answer to that, because if it's about rotating so people have different job responsibilities, that's one thing. But if it's moving them into the food service department because we need assistance there, and we're in school right now, we need our teaching assistants in our classroom. So I don't think we have the ability to do that. Depending on where we're at with the number of kids that are virtually learning, that could free up some EA time, which could assist in other areas. We've talked about food service. We've also talked about assisting with cleaning, and we've also are working with the Boys and Girls Club and the YMCA to provide, for the lack of better care, daycare on Wednesdays for those families that just can't be home. And then if we have some teaching assistant time, we may be able to sign on Wednesdays, working with the Boys and Girls Club. There's an example of trying to meet the needs of the community, because we do have, we've got about 100 families that are saying, I want my children in the buildings, but I can't be home. I can't get off work, and I can't leave my second grader at home. That's a problem. That's a problem with going all virtual. And I mean, if the state says you're all going virtual, we got a huge crisis, because we have parents that can't take off. I'm just rambling and lost my train of thought.
Okay. We have a question regarding teacher evaluation observation.
Yeah.
During the crisis, educator effectiveness was suspended.
Yeah.
A teacher's asking how principals will observe and evaluate instruction when it's occurring online. Is there going to be anything different given to the e-learning component that teachers will be offering as compared to the classroom?
I've shared with secondary principals that educator effectiveness is really, really a low priority at this time. Most important is to get our kids back and our staff back safely, to design, create, and effectively put together this instructional model. We won't be talking about educator effectiveness for some time. And quite frankly, if DPI offers a waiver on that this year, we will discuss that very seriously at Cabinet about doing that. There will be ways for principals to evaluate. To be honest with you, we're not going to be talking about educator effectiveness for quite some time.
If we're offered a waiver, that discussion at Cabinet is going to be very short. We want to focus on giving you the resources to learn the best you can, how to e-learn, how to get through COVID-19 in this new educational setting. I am not concerned at all about educator effectiveness right now. We have a lot on our plate right now, and as Connie said, that is a very, very low priority. Don't worry about it. We aren't looking to try to evaluate you and your teaching, your new teaching methods through the technology and e-learning, because we're all learning. That's not what this is all about.
Okay. We have a question about student-parent engagement. We noticed that there were some students that were disengaged during the e-learning, and parents didn't seem as responsive as in the past. What are our thoughts on helping teachers navigate all of that, engaging students and parents?
Yes.
I don't think
in March, it was like jumping off a cliff. We did a very, very good job. You guys did a very, very good job jumping off that cliff and trying to navigate through that emergency. I wouldn't say this is an emergency right now, but this is a crisis right now. We have to deal with that. I'm not sure to the extent you can control what you can control, and you do that each and every day in your own classrooms. The balance between delivery of your curriculum and delivering it in a way where it engages students. That's what you do each and every day. You can't control the family at home in their living room and Johnny, quite frankly, outside, not paying any attention to this. That's something that that's an issue probably more for student services. I can say, however, we have to respond to that. The same thing with grading last year. It was a difficult decision, and we ticked a lot of people off, but we went to the pass no grade. That's not an option this year. We will be grading. So the stakes are much higher right now. And engaging students through e-learning that don't want anything to do with this, or quite frankly, you have some parents that it's not their concern, or they're living in a house with parents with their own issues and mental health baggage. And for parents, their educating of their children isn't necessarily the priority. Hence the reason we need to get our kids back in school.
That face-to-face time, if you think about your secondary classroom, and then, as I mentioned before, theoretically, that class size would be cut in half. That time with those kids is so important to build relationships. Engagement and relationships go hand in hand. So as we build relationships with our students, we're going to be motivating them to engage in instruction. We just didn't have that last spring. Students went from seeing their teacher every single day to not. And so this blended approach and that face-to-face time is critical to get to know your kids, their learning needs. And I really believe that will improve our engagement piece.
We're getting down to the last 5 minutes. I got a couple specific questions. I would like to jump in. I know some people submitted questions in the chat. I'll have to go back and check there. I think I got those as they were coming in. We got to most of the questions. very specific question, will classroom doors be required to be locked during class, or will we be able to open them for ventilation? I think for that question, the classroom doors can always be open. They just have to be locked, so when they're shut, they're locked.
Yeah.
Correct.
I think maybe ventilation.
Very good question. The issue yesterday came up regarding fans, and the directive from the CDC is, and as well as Portage County, low fans, the box fans that sit on the ground are acceptable. The taller pedestal are not. Obviously, if there's droplets in the air, they're going to tend to be more at this level. Again, it's guidance, because the droplets are going to go and hit that fan too. We can have fans. It's about and we are increasing or improving all of our ventilation systems through the referendum. That said, not all of our buildings are there yet. So we want to make sure that we maximize ventilation, and the guidelines are suggesting that we do that as well. And to me, it makes sense to have doors open. But the issue is they shouldn't be locked in the event there's an emergency. But it makes sense to have open air throughout the building to the extent that we can.
A question going back to masks. If we identify students that are not required to wear masks, and that's okay, how do we communicate that to teachers?
Yeah, great question.
And bus drivers.
Yeah, that's a great question. We'll address that. That's going to be difficult, but we're going to address that, because we're put a little mask free because I'm authorized by it's going to have to be something that you're going to be able to show that I have an authorization not to wear this mask. And of course, that's going to open up the whole issue of students getting into issues and arguments. And I've had people ask me, take your mask off already. No, I choose to keep my mask on, not in my school setting here. Very good question.
We just have a few minutes left. I'll see if I can find a question that might be answered briefly. We talk about health room services and where they'll be located at specific schools. Are there any changes that staff need to be aware of?
There will be. We had summer school in a handful of our buildings, and our principals had checklists of everything that they had to get clear or complete, if I may. And then we had to walk through each one of our buildings, and the walkthrough was with Barry and myself. For secondary would be Connie Bryan, custodians, maintenance. A number of people will do the walkthrough, and part of the checklist is providing an isolation room. In the event somebody goes to the office and they have the symptoms, they'll be put into an isolation room until their parents come. There'll be certain protocols with that, so there'll be an additional space outside of the office space and outside of the typical nursing stations.
I believe that's going to be reviewed with staff in their buildings.
That will be reviewed, right? Your principals are doing that right now. They will review, and of course, not only are we offering another week of preparation for lesson plan preparation and for professional development relating to instruction, it's also going to provide time for the principals and staff to walk through the protocol and have staff give feedback as it relates to the new protocol, including your classrooms, because some of you will be asked to take stuff out of your classroom so we can create more elbow space, if I may. So that's the building work, and that's all the work that will be done individually, and that will be different from one building to the next.
And we are almost out of time. We have 1 minute left. We answered most questions. Do you guys have any very brief concluding remarks before we sign off?
I want to first of all apologize for stepping out. As I sit through at 5 of these meetings today, I'm monitoring emails, my phone. A phone call came through related to the opening of school that I've been waiting for the last 3 hours. I had to take it, so I apologize. I will be briefed on what was missed when I stepped out.
There's also a recording of this, Craig, that if other staff would like to refer it to others that couldn't attend, this will be recorded and will be posted with the entire series on the district website.
Okay, thank you. In closing, This is difficult stuff. We're asked to make difficult decisions when there aren't good decisions. We've got to make the best of these decisions. And it's been a challenge, and we're going to continue to move forward. And trust me when I say I feel the weight of the community. And part of the weight of the community includes our staff on my shoulders to make the best decisions possible to move forward. Trust me when I say we're very, very serious about this. I know there are going to be people that aren't going to, you're simply not going to like what we're doing. We can't please everyone. I'm relying on Portage County. And Portage County is relying on the science, not the politics. I'm relying on the science. And what I'm hearing right now is there's a push from the medical institutions as well, that throughout our country, there are places where it's okay to start opening up schools. And there are places that, quite frankly, are not ready. Right now, we believe we're one of those school districts that can attempt to open up our buildings. That may change. We may open up. We may close in a week. I don't know. But doggone it, let's give this a try and see if we can't get our kids back in school. Because I think if we can get in school for a week or two, I think we're going to ease into it. And I think we can make this work. And if we can't, we'll pivot. Thanks for your time.